Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our Earth Day CLE presentation by Ms. Kristen Schlemmer, who is the legal director of Bayou City Waterkeeper. And we've really been looking forward to this presentation. Over the past year and a half, there's definitely been a heightened awareness of certain issues that impact communities disparately. And one of those is definitely environmental related justice issues. And that's one of many things that Kristen will be touching on today. But we just wanted to welcome you all to the CLE. Thank you all for joining us. And there will be time at the end for questions. But before we start our presentation, I wanted to introduce Kristen, who is a friend to HYLA. And again, we're just so grateful for her time. So Ms. Kristen Schlemmer is a public interest environmental lawyer. As the legal director of Bayou City Waterkeeper, she works every day to advance water, climate, and infrastructure justice in Greater Houston by representing the organization in court and state proceedings and serving as a legal resource for local communities and their nonprofit partners. A Houston native, Kristen went to UT Austin for undergrad and graduated from Tulane Law in New Orleans in 2010. She clerked for 2 federal judges at the district and appeals court levels before returning to her hometown to hone her litigation skills for 4 years at Sussman Godfrey, where she had the chance to try cases to a jury and argue countless motions. Kristen then transitioned into public interest environmental litigation at Irvine and Connor, a small local land use and environmental boutique, before starting her dream job at Bayou City Waterkeeper. Outside of work, she spends a lot of time with her family, which includes her 2-year-old daughter. She's also been trained as a master naturalist and serves on the local board of the New Leaders Council, which is a national organization dedicated to dismantling racism and social injustices at the local level by training the next generation of progressive leaders. And again, Kristen, thank you for being here, sharing your expertise and your heart with us. And I'll be watching for questions, so please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. The court's number will be placed in the chat, so look out for that. And with that being said, I'll be quiet and hand it over to Kristen.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm Kristen Schlemmer, the legal director of Bayou City Waterkeeper. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our work today, give you a closer look at 2 lawsuits that we've been involved in, as well as a policy-driven campaign that we're currently pushing forward, and share how you as lawyers and Houstonians can support this work. So before I begin, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about Bayou City Waterkeeper. We're based in Houston, and we work across this region toward a more resilient future for the millions of people who call this very wet place home. Our approach to resilience is multifaceted and includes wetland preservation, fighting for cleaner water, and advocating for more equitable infrastructure decisions, particularly as those infrastructure decisions relate to water, wastewater, and flooding. We start by helping communities advocate for themselves, and we work to influence and improve decision-making processes and hold real estate developers, industrial polluters, and regulators, so the government, accountable through litigation when necessary. So litigation isn't our only focus, but it is in our DNA as an organization. We were actually founded out of the fight over the Bayport terminal in the early 2000s. Our efforts didn't stop the construction of the terminal, but our lawsuit and advocacy efforts did help preserve nearly 1,000 acres of coastal habitat and create 100 acres of new or enhanced wetland habitats. As we'll discuss later today, our work also has led the city of Houston to enter a $2 billion consent decree to address nearly a decade's worth of Clean Water Act violations associated with its aging sanitary sewer infrastructure system. And last summer, we filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for allowing a residential real estate development to be built in the 100-year floodplain and over wetlands. And the wetlands are actually in the background of the photo you see here in the slide. So first, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about our clean water work, specifically through the lens of our Clean Water Act citizen suit and related intervention against the city of Houston, which led to the city committing to invest $2 billion in its wastewater infrastructure through a settlement called a consent decree that was approved by a court here in town last month. To give you some background, the city of Houston has 39 wastewater treatment plants across the greater Houston area. Nearly all of these are located next to a bayou or creek, which ultimately flows into Galveston Bay. So it's therefore extremely important to the health of all of our waterways that the city of Houston's wastewater treatment and collection systems function the way they're supposed to. So unfortunately for years, they haven't. This picture shows an extreme example of wastewater treatment gone totally wrong. This is a picture of a Houston wastewater treatment plant that went underwater during Harvey. As a result, sewage flowed out of the plant and into our bayous and neighborhoods without any kind of treatment. So I guess I share this as an extreme example, but also to maybe help you keep this in mind before you wade through floodwater unnecessarily. Sometimes we need to do it for our safety, but other times it's smarter to keep put, and this is one of the reasons why. So more commonly, this is kind of what we see in terms of a sewage overflow. The city of Houston reports about 1,000 overflows or discharges over the course of a year from its 39 wastewater treatment plants, and then the entire collection system associated with those plants. So these are all the pipes that run all around the city, taking waste out of our homes and businesses and carrying it to these plants. So these sewer overflows take many forms. Rainstorms can carry hundreds of thousands of gallons of untreated wastewater into our bayous. Raw sewage also can pool in neighborhood green spaces and elementary school grounds. Toilets can back up into families' homes, and that in particular poses an environmental justice issue that I'll touch on in a little bit. But whatever form an overflow takes, it dirties Houston's water and harms the public's health. So as one recent example, during Tropical Storm Beta last fall, the city of Houston reported sewer overflows of more than 500,000 gallons from locations clustered around the University of Houston downtown and Woodland Park located in the Heights area. Similar reports go out anytime we have a larger than average rainstorm. I saw a few reports like these during Tropical Storm Imelda, of course during Harvey, but they've also popped up in connection with heavier unnamed rainstorms. So the law does offer some remedies and some opportunities for influencing these processes and making our infrastructure better. So each of the city's 39 wastewater treatment plants is regulated by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, also known as the TCEQ, our state's chief environmental regulator. When regulating water quality, the TCEQ is basically carrying out duties delegated to them by the federal government under the Clean Water Act and related regulations, though they also enforce the Texas Water Code and other state environmental requirements too. One main way that the TCEQ carries out this regulatory role in the wastewater context is by issuing a permit to individual wastewater treatment plants across the state, including the 39 here within the city of Houston. These permits set conditions on what the plant can and can't discharge, how it must treat the waste passing through the facility, and what testing it must do, all to protect the water quality in our bayous and downstream waters like Galveston Bay, as well as the public's health. So when a facility violates a permit's term, it also violates the Federal Clean Water Act and can face enforcement action and serious penalties, either by the TCEQ or federal regulators at the EPA, or even by private individuals and organizations like Bayou City Waterkeeper, who are allowed to sue under the Clean Water Act citizen suit provision. But for decades, despite the city plaguing its residents and our waterways with thousands of discharges of untreated sewage, my cat is going to be getting involved in this presentation periodically, so I apologize. Despite the city plaguing its residents and our waterways with thousands of discharges of untreated sewage, the TCEQ and EPA didn't seem to be doing anything about it. There were some rumors of them negotiating a consent decree, but this was almost a decade that we were hearing this and nothing was happening. And meanwhile, water samples taken across our watershed and in Galveston Bay consistently found our bayous, creeks, and bays had high levels of fecal bacteria. One of the major sources of this fecal bacteria was these sewage overflows. So faced with this large unresolved problem that was unhealthy and very gross, Bayou City Waterkeeper decided to take action. In July 2018, we served the city of Houston with a notice of intent to sue over more than 9,000 violations of the Clean Water Act. Each of those violations, again, represented an overflow or other discharge of untreated sewage that took place over a 5-year time period. So 9,000 overflows over 5 years. Under the Clean Water Act, when groups like ours want to file citizen suits, we have to give 60 days notice of the lawsuit to give regulators a chance to file their own enforcement action. Our notice fortunately did get the attention of federal and state regulators who, at the very last minute, it was like 59 days and like 23 hours later, they filed an enforcement action in federal court. The court let Bayou City Waterkeeper intervene in the federal action. But for most of the life of the case, the EPA and the state of Texas, along with the city of Houston, as the defendant, worked to negotiate a settlement behind closed doors. So under the Clean Water Act, groups like ours are intended to supplement enforcement by federal and state regulators. The way we've done that was first by pushing for a process that was more transparent and inclusive of the communities most affected by the city's sewer problems. First, despite a truly bizarre secrecy clause that bound city council members from talking to their constituents about the terms of the draft consent decree before it had been approved, we were able to get the city to release a copy of the consent decree for public review and then obtain a longer comment period during which we coordinated comments by more than 80 individuals and organizations. We also held public meetings to educate residents about these issues. And this was something that the city, the EPA, and TCEQ had refused to do. The city was very resistant to our requests for a plan for community engagement over the life of the consent decree and did not want to confront environmental injustices in the city sewer system head on. And it's pretty typical to do both of those things in a consent decree like this one. So with that in mind, we focused on, once the draft of the consent decree was made public and was going to be presented to the court for approval, we had focused on modifying the proposed consent decree to include a program to help low-income homeowners repair sewer problems at their own homes. This recommendation was based not just on the fact that similar programs have been included in consent decrees across the city, across the United States, but also because in 2016, the Houston Chronicle reported lower income communities and communities of color are most likely to feel the consequences of Houston's long-running struggle with sewer overflows. And when we updated this analysis last year with expanded data, we reached the exact same conclusion. Unfortunately, the Trump administration had passed several rules and adopted different guidance materials that prevented the creation of these kinds of programs in the context of environmental consent decrees. And although the Biden administration has removed almost all those barriers, there's still a rule in place that stands in the way. So for now, the court has allowed the consent decree to move forward without any kind of program to help low-income homeowners with sewage problems at their own homes. So at the end of last month, the court approved the consent decree, which is kicking off requirements now for the city of Houston to start spending $2 billion on major upgrades to its sanitary sewer system over the next 15 years. We believe at Bayou City Waterkeeper that this consent decree represents an important first step to giving Houston residents a real solution to the sewage problems that we experience throughout the year. We do think it falls short of helping our low-income neighbors. So this is something that we're continuing to work on the advocacy front. We're also going to continue monitoring the city's compliance with the consent decree and make sure that it fulfills the obligations imposed under the decree over the next 15 years. And as interveners in the litigation, we will go back to court if we have to make sure that the city complies. So that's it on the City of Houston lawsuit. I guess now I thought I would turn to some of our wetlands related work. Litigation does form a part of our wetlands work. It's a small part, but an important part. More broadly, we're focused on engaging communities that are most affected by wetland loss and working together to influence decision makers to require more responsible development, avoid filling wetlands, avoid developing within the 100-year floodplain where these wetlands often are found, and take steps to offset unavoidable wetland losses by asking developers and asking regulators to make sure developers fulfill their obligations of mitigation under the Federal Clean Water Act. So one part of our wetlands work is called Wetlands Watch. Through this program, we work directly with community members to investigate developments that may be proceeding without the required permits and work to get decision makers involved. One example of that popped up in League City, and we were able to check out the development from the water. This is Robinson Bayou, which is off Clear Creek. Down in League City, those are two of my legal interns a couple summers ago. It was a fun trip, but it was also informative. So in 2012, Broadreach Partners is a residential real estate developer that applied for a permit from the Corps of Engineers under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Broadreach requested permission to fill about an acre of wetlands on a 30-acre tract along Robinson Bayou, just across the county line in Galveston County in League City, but failed to disclose effects on nearly 9 additional acres of forested wetlands. Broadreach's permit request fell through when the EPA raised concerns about the effect this project would have on these wetlands that were not included in its permit application. Broadreach moved forward anyway with the project and permanently filled in all wetlands but those closest to the bayou. Broadreach also elevated the property several feet above the subdivision next door. When a resident filed a complaint, though, the court did not take enforcement action. Instead, it issued approvals based on information provided by Broadreach's consultant, allowing the developer to avoid the federal permit process altogether. So we sued the Corps, challenging its decision under the Administrative Procedure Act. We argue that the Corps made a series of missteps and deferred too readily to the consultants hired by Broadreach, resulting in the Corps grossly underestimating the number of wetlands on the Broadreach site. The lawsuit is in its very earliest phases. Just last week, we argued against the Corps' motion to dismiss in federal court. Parth Gedji of Beck Redden has joined me as co-counsel on the case, and he argued the motion quite well. So that's, since that case is at the earliest phases, that's all I have to say about that. I thought I'd also just briefly touch on some of our non-legal work, which is in our Resilient Communities program area. Since Harvey, we've been working with some of our nonprofit partners and then also community members who we work with to make flood protections in Harris County more equitable and also more focused on nature-based solutions. We started out in the wake of Harvey by joining together with other organizations and helped to form the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, which today brings together 27 organizations along with community members working at the intersection of conservation, environmental justice, housing and transportation justice, public health, and civic participation. As many of you probably know, in 2018, on Harvey's first anniversary, Harris County voters passed a $2.5 billion bond to fund flood protection measures across the county. The first success of the coalition was advocating for equity and nature-based solutions to be express requirements of any spending under this bond. So working with our friends within SEER and our community partners like the group you see here, which is the Northeast Action Collective, we've built on that success since. In 2019, we advocated for Harris County to pass the Harris Thrives Resolution, which approved a process to prioritize communities who have suffered the most human impacts from flooding. And last year, we helped build the Community Flood Resilience Task Force, which places community members in a direct advisory capacity to key decision makers within Harris County. The intention of the task force is to take a more holistic and inclusive approach to the infrastructure challenges and opportunities within our community. This work is ongoing and has been pretty cool to be a part of. But it hasn't been without its challenges. You may have read recently, I think this was in the Chronicle last month, about a 1.4 billion shortfall in planned flood protection projects within Harris County. Based on our partners' analysis of public data, we found out that the Greens and Halls Bayou watersheds, which are lower income areas with the highest rate of flooding per housing unit during Harvey, has had a disproportionately low amount of money allocated toward them. The Greens Bayou watershed, for example, only is receiving 0.6% of planned spending, despite having the highest needs for flood protection now. So that's something we're actively working on, talking a lot about and figuring out our next steps. So stay tuned.
And
last,
Chris, oh, sorry, Chris,
yeah.
I just, may I ask really quick, I'm sorry. Just along that subject matter, are y'all following the, is Bayou City Waterkeeper following the sort of infrastructure plan under President Biden? I think that Ike Dike was recently like sort of put on his desk, and I wasn't sure if that was something y'all were kind of just monitoring to see where it could be going.
Yeah, that is definitely something we're following. I think the proposal to invest in our water infrastructure and flood resilience is great. I think that, you know, as an organization, we've been very vocal and involved in the environmental impact statement process and all the environmental planning for the Coastal Barrier Project. We think that there has been way too much attention and weight, you know, that has been put on building the coastal spine. One, you know, early success we've had is to try to shift a lot of the planning into more nature-based solutions, which is, you know, instead of having hardened levees, have more sand dunes and wetlands and natural, just sort of natural flood soaks and storm surge barriers. With the coastal spine itself, you know, we don't have a official position one way or the other, but the one thing that gives us pause is that it's extremely expensive, will not be built for quite some time, and doesn't have that long of a lifespan in terms of how, you know, how long it's intended to protect our coast. So that's something that we're definitely continuing to look at. But yeah, I'm curious to see kind of what continues to happen, because I think the funding question hasn't been a big one. So if that one's resolved, then we'll be focused more on, you know, whether this is the right thing to do or whether the, you know, project can be improved. And, you know, there's other organizations out there that have proposed alternatives, including the Speed Center at Rice University has, you know, a totally different plan that also involves building things out in Galveston Bay. But in both cases, they're affecting, you know, two important ecosystems. And yeah, it's complicated because our, you know, protecting human life is also really important too, especially from the industry and the shipping channel. We don't want storm surge carrying all of that into our, you know, neighborhoods during a storm. So yeah, thank you for asking that. So I guess just on a final note, I talked very quickly. I'm sorry about that. That meant this is, I've gotten to the end of my presentation quicker. But I guess I just wanted to let you know that there are several ways that you can support our work. As I mentioned with our wetlands lawsuit, we are working with a local law firm, Beck Redden, and it is always helpful to have pro bono support. What that has looked like in the past is having an attorney from a firm co-counsel with me on a lawsuit. I'm willing to have co-counsel play whatever role they like, whether that's doing the heavy lifting with a brief or getting an opportunity for some serious stand-up time. But I also have some more time-limited projects that I could use help with if there are any attorneys who aren't in a position to take on a whole case, but still want to get involved and support our work in that way. Second, you can volunteer with us in a non-legal capacity. We hired a scientist to join our staff earlier this year And she's in the process of building up our water quality monitoring program and our wetland watch program too, and both will present opportunities to get outside and volunteer. And third, we rely on the support of private individuals and private foundations to do the work that we do. Some of our strongest individual donors have been local attorneys. So if you're in a position to do so, we're always happy to receive donations of any amount. Your donation would support our programmatic work, but also help us pay our legal interns. They provide valuable help to our legal work throughout the year. And you can make a tax-deductible donation on our website at www.bayoucitywaterkeeper.org. And here's my email address. Happy to answer any questions. If you want to talk after this, you can reach out to me by email. I like to make time to talk to people, and I'm happy to, talk about anything, if it's even like picking my brain about my legal career path, or how I got to, where I am. But thank you so much for your time. I've been so happy to be here today.
We're so grateful for your time too, and it's such an important subject. And when I first reached out to you and we chatted about this, I was like, when people first think of Houston, they think of, energy capital, oil and gas, but with so many bayous like cutting through the city, with us being like less than an hour from the Gulf Coast, there are so many important like conservation related issues that impact our city as well. And before we let you go, I just had one follow-up question related to the concept of infrastructure justice specifically, because when I did some of my sort of surface research of environmental justice, there are several sort of sub-factions under that umbrella, like climate change justice, and even like food deserts and food accessibility intersects with environmental related justice issues too. So with infrastructure justice, I know like floodplains, that's a huge part of it you had presented on earlier, but are there any sort of other examples of infrastructure justice related to city planning, et cetera, not only here in Houston, but other big metropolitan cities that we should be aware of? Like I think of like dumping in neighborhoods and those sorts of examples.
Yeah, and I guess, so I don't want to get overly technical, because it's like when we think of water, it's kind of all the same thing, but it does flow through different systems, both built and natural. So, I touched on I talked a lot about our City of Houston lawsuit. So that's one version of infrastructure and justice. With flooding, it's not even just, who floods most, but it's also like the flood protection systems and drainage systems that are in place. That also implicates the Clean Water Act. The city, Harris County and Harris County Flood Control District share a permit issued by the TCEQ under its delegation under the Clean Water Act that regulates how they manage stormwater. And that's, just everything that runs off when it rains down the street, down the drains, and into our bayous. But there's a lot of solutions to stormwater pollution that are driven through that permit and through that program that also relate to flooding. Like green infrastructure is one way to kind of clean the water before it enters our bayous. And a lot of, sometimes green infrastructure can just be a constructed wetland, like a very nice natural area at a place where stormwater would otherwise just directly enter the bayou. But that also can be a water soak, something that keeps floodwater out of neighborhoods or takes it, soaks it up more quickly than it would be otherwise. I guess another version of that is in the 5th Ward in particular, that community group I showed earlier, which I guess my slides are still up. I'll just show them. Yeah, there they are. How they came together, and it's pretty cool. They're a bilingual group. A lot of the residents speak only Spanish. Other residents speak only English, but they came together and have managed to work together despite this linguistic barrier. But they've been dealing with drainage problems, which is another version of a flooding problem. And they have kind of an antiquated storm drain system to where they have the big drains in front of their houses, and they get very, they get filled up with debris and with trash. And the city hasn't been helping them keep those clear. They've been taking the position that they have to keep them clear themselves, which, in the context of how flooding is managed across the city and drainage is managed across the city, is imposing a burden on the residents that, isn't imposed on residents in other part of the city, especially wealthier parts of the city. Drinking water too is a big one. I haven't done as much drinking water work. I did, with my colleagues in the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, early on during the pandemic. And this was something happening across the nation, is there was this very real concern about people's water getting turned off for non-payment of their water bills. This has been a problem that preceded the pandemic, but it seemed, it already felt unjust. I think, water is a right, like we shouldn't ever be turning people's water off, except for maybe in very extreme circumstances, but people need water to live. But during the pandemic, they also need water so that they can stay home, so they can wash their hands. And so there's like very simple, real needs, health needs during the pandemic led us to kind of have a mini campaign where we advocated to the city of Houston not to turn people's water off during COVID. Initially Mayor Turner, I think, announced a moratorium of like a month or two, and then that got extended indefinitely. But there's all other kinds of, injustices that arise with drinking water. And I guess one other one is just our water bills. That's actually a combined bill for, water that comes into your house and wastewater that goes out. And I mean, I guess the whole issue of non-payment that I just mentioned, that comes up when people can't afford their water. The question of what should happen when people aren't paying their bills is, I think, one that really implicates environmental justice, because personally, I don't think people's water should be turned off. But then the question is, well, how do, what's the solution? The city does have a limited program to help elderly people who are unable to pay their bills. But again, that's limited. It doesn't reach everybody who's in that position. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones that come to mind.
No, thank you. When you had mentioned, especially like the drinking water issue, and how, I mean, COVID has certainly been a magnifying glass, amplifying like sort of systemic obstacles that already were in place, but it's definitely exacerbated those. But then I thought also of the recent winter freeze and how that was certainly a huge blockade for so many people dealing with their homes and having their pipes frozen and not having the ability to drink any water or leave their homes to even find water. So it's a very layered intersectional problem, and I really do appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And I was going to say, I can't believe I didn't mention Winter Storm Uri, because that was, I think, such a, horrible example, but one of those examples of what it's like to be without, a key necessary utility. It gave a lot of us had a taste of that.
Yes.
For many of us, we had that issue resolved like within a week. Maybe we had a boil water notice longer. But there's some people in our city that are still without water, that are still working to fix their pipes. Same deal across the Gulf South. I think Jackson, Mississippi has been a prominent example. Houston's gotten more of the news coverage, but there's other folks really hurting about this. And so I guess just imagine what we all endured for a week. Some people have been dealing with that, for the last 2 months. And that's,
and even before.
Yeah,
well,
right.
Kristen, before we let you go, because I know your time is very precious and you have a lot of important work to do, I just wanted to ask, my last question before we let you go is just any sort of tips, sort of conservation-based lifestyle practices that we can be, for all of us watching, can sort of incorporate into our everyday lives to help further your objectives and conserve water better.
Yeah, well, I don't want to undervalue individual efforts because I think that by making individual changes, it puts you in a position to better support changes at the systems level. But I think that's what we need.
Right.
I guess without getting political, I'm like 501c3 hat here. I guess I'm not advocating for any certain elected official, so it's okay. But I mean, it really is about pushing for major changes, especially at the federal level, but the state and local level too. That's what we need to do now to make a real difference for our city, for our state, for our planet, especially as, you know, as we've seen with Uri and Harvey and countless other storms. Climate change is real, and we need to be taking big action at the systems level to change that. But at an individual level, you can get involved with organizations like ours. Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience is another, you know, the umbrella organization I mentioned earlier. If you want to browse the organizations kind of under that umbrella, you could find other worthy causes to support. And like, what else?
There's so many.
Yeah, and then just be gentle
But
with
yeah.
yourself. I mean, I think we should all do the best we can. But there's bigger problems that are bigger than any one individual's action, but we can work together to push for real solutions.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Kristen. That's like the perfect bow on to end this dialogue. I know there's so many more things to talk about, but thank you for giving us just this sort of primer on this issue. And thank you for also sharing your email address. I imagine a lot of us would like to contact you individually, knowing that there are ways that we can support you, not only as attorneys, but non-legal volunteer opportunities as well. And what I wanted to do, I just wanted to read out today's course number in case folks aren't right by their computer. It's 174118261. And again, that's 174118261. And Kristen, I'll get this emailed out to you, so no worries. And just thank you again. Happy Earth Day to you. Thank you for this lunchtime with you. And thanks to all of you for watching. Contact me if you have any questions about upcoming HYLA events, and contact Kristen to volunteer and help. So you all take care, have a good day and a great weekend ahead. And thanks again, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Happy Earth Day. Bye.
Bye.